All right, right off the bat, this board's going to trigger a few fans. But I want to start off by saying that I got a new set of banners from Ice Jerseys today. They got a sale on all the banners. So I'm like, yeah, I'll take those. And I think it's kind of cool. So maybe eventually someday it's just banners all the way around, or I just knock down a wall over here and take over another room, or knock down a wall over here and just then there wouldn't be stairs, and stuff that's just completely rational, normal, that normal rational people would think about. Anyways, now these power rankings are not scientific, but yeah, I put some thought into it. I thought, now coming out of this, which teams do I think are potentially in the best spot? I still think, and I know Tampa Bay's been shut down today as I'm recording this, but we're going to see that happen in other cities as well. This is standard. Nobody's been in a bubble yet, so it makes sense that there's going to be cases. So, and the funny thing about this is that there are going to be people who say, you can't have this team above that team. You can't have that team above that team. I learned a long time ago, about 2 years ago, if I'm going to have power rankings at all, I can't worry about where they are on the board. And there has to be some conviction. So what you're looking at on this side here is how I do this. And so I thought, I haven't done a video where I explain the power rankings and how they've changed and how that works. And so I thought, you know what? I might as well do that, because why not? We're not going to be doing a regular power rankings until probably 2024 or something like that. So why not discuss how I've made my decisions? And during the play-in round, I'm not going to be doing that either. Now, I've got these organized the way I do for a reason. So the top 7 I would see as probably major contenders. The next 7 is that next tier, and then the 7 below that is the next tier, right? And then the bottom 3 are, I think, the least likely to probably move on to, say, win a Stanley Cup. And then the bottom down here, these are your 7 teams that are out, and my feeling on where they're headed going into next season. And again, there's no science behind it, but there should be some conviction of, okay, this is where they are, and that's it. I've had many nights where on a Saturday, the games are finishing up, and I've looked at the power rankings and gone, wow, that's that team really moved up this week. Or conversely, wow, that team really dropped this week. And it's something that every night at the end of the games, I decide, all right, well, this team moves up and this team moves down. And there's a lot that goes into that. And there's a lot more that goes into it now than used to. Now, I used to use, it wasn't a point system, but it kind of sort of was, that if you win in regulation, it gets more consideration than winning in overtime, which gets more consideration than winning in a shootout or losing in a shootout, which, and so on. But I found that system, there was way too much movement that would go on. Now, there are times where you're going to see massive movement on a power rankings board. Here's an example. Calgary, I got at 18. Let's say they beat Dallas 5-1, they beat Boston 4-2, and then they beat Pittsburgh 4-1. Clearly, they've had a great week. They're going to move up. They could move up as much as maybe 6 or 7 spots, depending on how well they played and the teams in front of them. So this is part of, what people sometimes say, oh, the power rankings, these teams moved around too much. So let's just say Calgary wins a game 4-2 over St. Louis. Vancouver wins a game 4-3 in a shootout over Ottawa. So just as an example, I'm then tempted to swap these two. Because I'll say, you know what? Calgary beating St. Louis, that was a great game. Vancouver beating Ottawa in a shootout, that's really, really tight. And Ottawa's a team down here and St. Louis is a team up here. So again, there has to be some sort of system where you decide, but points isn't going to be it. And market corrections I've got on the board here, because there's times that I do that, where on a Saturday I'll say, I've got this team in this spot, and they had a really, really, really good week. This team didn't. I need to put this team ahead of that team. So let's say, for instance, Saturday night, I've got Chicago here, and I've got Florida here. Florida went 0-3 and lost by a combined score of 12-2 that week. Chicago went 3-0, and they had a combined score of 12-2 in their favor. Let's just say Chicago was 28th coming into this week. So they've already moved up 4 spots. But I'm looking, you know what? Head-to-head, Chicago might very well beat Florida. So I'd be tempted to find a way to maybe have Florida either closer to Chicago or behind Chicago. The one thing I don't get into is, I don't worry about it, is let's say Vancouver beats Dallas. And they beat them handedly, 8-1. Let's just say it's 8-1. But Dallas went 2-0 the rest of the week, and Vancouver went 0-2. I don't care that Vancouver beat Dallas 8-1. That's not going to decide where they end up in the overall compared to Dallas. Because, again, yeah, they trashed Dallas in that one game, but Dallas had a better overall week than Vancouver. And one thing that goes into that too that's not on the board is sometimes the back-to-back games. I'll look and go, you know what? They lost a game 5-1 tonight, but they played last night and they won that one 4-0. So they, maybe they're tired, and I'll come back to that. Parity. Parity means that in terms of setting up a power rankings, I do it as well as I can, but there's always going to be the instance where, let's just say Montreal at 20, they go into Tampa and they win 4-0. Yeah, it doesn't disprove things, and that's where the argument comes in as well. Like, well, your power rankings on Saturday were disproved by all of the results on Sunday. The thing is, a power rankings doesn't anticipate what's going to happen next week. It just tells you, so based on what's been going on, and I usually try to make sure it reflects how things have gone over the last month, that, it reflects over the last month these teams have had the best record. So yes, if Montreal goes in and trashes Tampa, under the old system, I would have made some moves. We'll come back to the old system in a bit. But under the system I currently employ, it doesn't necessarily mean Tampa loses first place. Win quality and loss quality, I kind of already went over that, where I talked about your regulation win, your overtime win, your shootout win. But not only that. So let's say, and this is an argument I had with Canuck fans a few times this year, Vancouver has a game where they win 2-1. But Markstrom makes 46 saves, and a lot of them are just highlight reel saves. And you're coming out of that game and going, Vancouver did win the game, and that's important, so you can't drop them. I don't like how they won it. And conversely, a team may lose that game. So let's just say they're against, I'll just say Winnipeg. They're against Winnipeg, they win 2-1, and Markstrom just shuts down Winnipeg. I may look at that loss for Winnipeg and say, yeah, Winnipeg lost that game. I can't penalize them there because they played really, really well. And I can't make that penalty happen. Like, for instance, let's just say Carolina. Carolina went into Vancouver this year, and they had a controversial, probably should have been a goal that wasn't counted. And they probably should have won that game over Vancouver. Didn't. And so coming out of that night, I was like, well, I'm not penalizing Carolina. So while I did the review and I said, well, this is how the rules work, and Carolina fans were mad at me and said, it's because you're a Canuck fan. When I looked at the power rankings board that night, it was, I can't make a change based on the result of that game because of how that game was won. So I did appreciate the shutout, which was with an asterisk if you're a Canes fan. But at the same time, I kind of thought, that game, I'm not going to look at that result in the grand scheme of things and think that makes anything different unless Vancouver had been playing really poorly and that was a really close result that tells me things are getting better. Team confidence. This is unmeasurable, right? Team confidence for me shows up in being able to hold leads. Not losing sight of the game at any point. You don't have a 10-minute period where you're like, what are they doing? That kind of thing. Where the whole 60 minutes, they play really, really well. I had a problem with Boston at numerous points during this season because they went. I think they had 3 wins in 15 games at one point, but they kept losing in overtime and shootouts. So they were still getting points, and they were so far ahead of everybody that nobody seemed to be paying attention to it. And I felt like I was the only one witnessing what was going on here. Every time I saw power rankings elsewhere, Boston was in the top 3, and I'm like, what are they watching? So for me, there was a confidence issue and definitely taking their eye off the ball problem with Boston, where they might have a lead and they might go, well, we got this, and they just take their foot off the gas. Or, when they needed a big goal, they just weren't getting it. So for me, Boston took a big dive at that time where they didn't for anybody else, and it was because I felt like there was a confidence slash also a problem with the overall concentration on the game and getting it done. Standings, and I have a question mark at the end of standings because there's times where people will say, "Well, okay, you've got." I'm just trying to think. Let's just say Calgary was first in the West. Let's just, for argument's sake, Calgary's first in the West. But they've lost 8 out of 10 and they've looked miserable. So I have Calgary dropped way down, and somebody might pop up and go, hey, you can't have Calgary that low. They're first in the West. But a power ranking should be telling you how a team's playing now. And again, it's not going to be scientific. There is no scientific way to do a power rankings. But again, it should reflect how they've played over, like I said, about the last month. And so I do my best to do that. And again, the accusation is that I love and hate every team in the league based on where they are in the power rankings. And over the last couple of years, I've been accused of loving one team too much or hating one team too much. And by one team, I mean every team in the league. And then get a pass I have with a question mark here as well. What I mean by that is simple. So let's just say Boston's, tops in the league. They're 10 points ahead of everybody, and they lose a couple of games. If they'd won 10 in a row before losing those two, I will likely give them a bit of a pass, which is tough. But it's something that I learned when I had to stop being too reactionary, that if Boston loses 2 games in regulation, they don't have to start falling all the way back. I used to have it if they lost in regulation, you might drop 2 spots. Depending on what Colorado did, they might drop 3. That's too reactionary. So I wait until it's a bit of a trend, and then I'll make the correction. Where I'm like, yeah, this is a trend. They're going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to have to correct things. And that's where the market correction comes in. They get a pass at first maybe, and then there's a market correction. This also works that way for teams at the bottom. The end of the season, I had the Kings all the way up to 18th, and I had people saying, are you crazy? The Kings aren't that good. And yet they kept winning games. And I wasn't bumping them up in the standings until they had a really good record in about 6 or 7 games, because I was of the same mind of, well, it doesn't really count because they're not important games, but I couldn't deny that they were getting it together. They were playing really well. Gabriel Velarde looked like he was finally both in the NHL and playing well, which was a huge boost for them. And the Kings were getting it all figured out. So I had to bump them up ahead of teams that were way ahead of them in the standings because I felt the Kings in that time were playing better. But I did hold the Kings back for a couple of weeks before I saw that as a trend. And that's where it gets kind of tricky. The one thing that inspired me to start doing my own power rankings before I had to worry about a channel and all that and trying to figure out, where I thought teams should be was, do injuries matter? And the answer is, not really. Like, the injuries matter to the fans, yes. They matter to the coaches and to the players, obviously, because they got to figure, okay, we're going to be without, let's say, for Minnesota. Oh, Stahl's hurt, Stalock's hurt, we got to, rally the troops and get scoring from somewhere else. But me, when I'm doing the power rankings, if I'm watching a game with Calgary and Monahan gets hurt, just as a for instance, it doesn't mean that I come out of that game going, well, Calgary won, but Monahan's hurt, so I'm going to have to drop him down. And I would see that. I would see that on various power rankings, not just in hockey either. I'd see it with National Football League especially, where I'd be like, well, they won and they're 5-1, but they got a couple of key injuries this week, so we dropped them down. Why? Until the games are played and until we see that injury is going to cause massive problems for a team, why are you dropping them down? This year's best example would be Columbus. Columbus played really, really well throughout injuries until the Seth Jones injury. Everybody was getting hurt, and it didn't matter. Korpisalo gets hurt, that's fine. They go to Merzlikins. Merzlikins was fantastic, for the most part. And then, things kind of spiraled when Seth Jones got hurt. It's tough, but again, injuries don't necessarily mean a team moves down or moves up. I've seen it as well, where it's like, for instance, Pittsburgh, where somebody could say, well, Pittsburgh's had a rough week, they're 0-3, but looks like Sid's coming back this week, so we're bumping them up. Don't bump them up until you see the result. Don't bump them up until you've seen that things are actually getting better. So, again, I expect this board that, again, there's no scientific basis behind it. I'm not using this to make any predictions. I'm just using this as an example. I did think, well, which ones are probably contending coming out of this this stoppage? The only one that's not a top team is in this row is Dallas. All of them are top teams. All of these are teams that have buys into the playoffs in the top row. And yeah, I think they were probably the best teams. But does it mean that the 24th ranked Blackhawks aren't a threat? No, absolutely not. But we'll see what happens. And just for the record, I did watch Sportsnet talking about Tampa getting shut down, and everybody kind of agrees. We're going to see this happen, so don't panic too much over it. Don't react too much. Nobody's in a bubble yet, so obviously there are people who are out in the community that are going to get this. And they're still confident that we'll see hockey probably this summer. And maybe it's the optimism, maybe it's the fact that day by day this just changes. The whole system changes, as my power rankings do during any given season. So there you go. I just wanted to give this as sort of a, this is how I do the power rankings. And Canuck fans will be mad that they're at 17th, but keep in mind at the time of the pause, they were lower than that. And they had, I think, 2 wins and 8 going into it. It was some really, really bad record for them, where their defense finally started catching up to them, where they finally were starting to lose these games that they had been winning earlier in the year. But again, we'll see how it goes. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and I am as anxious as anybody to see regular season hockey start up as soon as they can get next season started, so we can start all arguing over how stupid I am with my power rankings, because I miss that. I miss when the greatest of the stresses I had during any Saturday or during any day of the week really was, here comes the power rankings, and I get nervous every single time. Every single time that it hits Saturday night and I got to reveal the power rankings, I'm like, oh god, those fans are going to be so mad. But I don't change the power rankings because I know people are going to get angry, and I don't change power rankings to make people angry either. There have been times where Toronto's been number 1, and I'm like, yeah, nope, they're legit number 1. Boston's been number 1. I've gone, yep, nope, they belong there. Vancouver might be in the top row. Yeah, they're playing really well, or Vancouver goes into the bottom row, and I'm like, well, that's the way that works. So there you go. Again, let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and hey, I just figured a fun little sort of video today, and all those wonderful banners there. That's great. So that's nice. I like that. That's fun. So ice jerseys with their big sale, I got those for way cheaper than the original price was, because I never pay full price. Thanks again for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.